Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast on the 20th of October, 2018.
You profit from fear and hate, hoarding wealth and amassing power. The walls have been unleashed. We will not submit or cower. It's humanity's darkest side. We are ruled by thieves and liars.
Okay, just going to clean house a little bit before we get into some of the stories I want to talk about today. I'm going to be coming out soon with a couple of episodes, a couple of videos. One's going to be next episode of Know Your Owners, and that one is going to be. Hopefully, I'll have it done by this next weekend. Actually, I'm hoping. Been a little. Been a little busy the last couple weeks with school, so I haven't had as much of a time to work on my content. And the second one that's going to be coming out is I am going to be doing a video talking about the Compact for Migration, the UN Global Compact for Migration, because it seems, from what I can tell from what I found online, it seems that it's being used to undermine the sovereignty of the nations that end up signing on to it, and it has to do with bringing in millions of new immigrants to our countries. In fact, there was an article that was released not too long ago. I think it was actually from the CBC that was talking about how by 2100, the Liberal government wants Canada's population to be 100 million. Yeah, 100 million. It's a little unbelievable, but that's what they're pushing for. That's over 200% more of our population that we're doing now. And for that one, I haven't decided if I'm going to be doing a movie about it, just like a regular video about that. But what I was thinking is I might try and reach out and see if Bill Tufts wants to come onto the podcast, because he's been the one who's been blowing the whistle on this the most. He's the one who's been talking about it a lot on Twitter. So I'm thinking about doing a little bit of research into it and then reaching out to him, see if I can bring him on and we can discuss the issues. No promises on that, but that's what I'm going to try and do. So got a few different stories to get into today I want to talk about. The first one has to do with, we have yet another migrant caravan that is working its way up Central America towards the U.S. border. This has been something that America has seen before. There's been at least a couple more caravans that have gone through over the last year or so. And this is sort of, they're going, thousands of people, they band together, they march through. Right now they march from Honduras through Guatemala and into Mexico and trying to reach the southern border of the US, which to me it just seems to go to give more credence to what Donald Trump wants to do with a wall there, although what's happening with that wall we don't know, because he promised, that was one of his big campaign promises, and yet we have seen next to nothing when it comes to that wall being built. I think I've seen 4 or 5 different times where they say the wall is just starting to get built now. Even recently, within the last month, I've seen that, but so far, if it was really getting built, you figure we'd have some news stories about it. You figure we would have some pictures or some video footage of the wall to prove it, but this doesn't seem to be the case right now, so I don't really know what's happening there. But anyway, the migrant caravan streams out of Guatemala halted by Mexican police, and this is out of Reuters. And it says hundreds of members of a caravan of migrants who have crossed Guatemala tried to breach the Mexican border on Friday as Mexico vowed to tackle the convoy that U.S. President Donald Trump says must be stopped before it reaches the United States. In response to this, actually, Trump has sent U.S. troops to the southern border in order to stop this caravan from coming in. And even on Twitter, he made some threats towards the Mexican government, saying that they better do something about this. If they're just going to allow this caravan to go through, then they're going to be facing consequences because of it. And it kind of makes sense, because Mexico, if they're just going to do nothing and allow, even though this is hundreds, I'm pretty sure it is in the thousands. even if thousands of, they're just going to allow thousands of people to pass through their country in order to go to the U.S., sort of trying to brush their hands, saying it's not my problem, and they're just going to let it happen, then there's reasons that America would not be happy about this. And besides, we've seen in the past that Mexico has allowed this sort of thing to happen. I believe it was somewhere maybe only 4 or 5, at most 6 months ago, when there was a caravan that was making its way towards the U.S. border, and Mexico did absolutely nothing to stop it. So in this case, Trump decided to get a little hard with Mexico and make some threats and tell them that they will face, I believe it was actually some sanctions or tariffs if they did not do anything to try at least stop the caravan from making its way to the U.S. border. And in response to this, we ended up seeing that Mexican police in riot gear were being flown in from all ends of the country in order to stop this caravan from making its way into Mexico. We have some video footage here. So as you can see, 2 federal police-filled planes with anti-riot gear landed near the Mexican-Guatemalan border this morning. And this apparently made Trump pretty happy when he saw it. This made Trump pretty happy when he saw it. He ended up making a statement about it on Twitter, saying that he was thanking Mexico for actually doing something about it. But actually, as we can see, the caravan itself actually made its way to the Guatemalan border. It broke through the actual border fence between Guatemala and Mexico, and it more or less laid siege to the Mexican fence, and this is where the Mexican authorities responded in kind. And it says, migrants traveling in a mass caravan burst through a Guatemalan border fence and streamed by the thousands toward Mexican territory on Friday, defying Mexican authorities and treaties for an orderly crossing and U.S. President Trump threats of retaliation. On the Mexican side of the border bridge, they were met by a phalanx of police with riot shields. About 50 managed to push their way through before officers unleashed pepper spray, and the rest retreated. There's also been some reports coming out about how there was tear gas. There was tear gas used in this because to try and dispel the people, and it seems to have more or less worked, because we're starting to hear now how a lot of the people that were part of this caravan have actually turned around and have started heading back to Guatemala and Honduras. Not completely. There was also some people who ended up jumping into the ocean and making swims for rafts. We have some video footage there. We also have some video footage of the actual sort of assault on the border fence itself, and we're going to take a look through a few of these videos. But just give it a second. It'll load.
¡No, machín, no te sueltes!
Politically reckless, politically suicidal strategy ever, and to end up as president, it's going to reinforce those instincts, I guess.
Right. Clearly, the president thinks that this is something that worked for him in 2016, so why wouldn't it work in 2018? But of course, midterms are not presidential races, and that's why you see there are places where the president hasn't gone. He hasn't gone, for example, really to Florida, despite the fact that Rick Scott is, has been a close ally of his.
So there are the videos there, and people online who have been discussing this. Some of the people, they just want to let the caravan in. The thing is about that, though, is that they've been trying to present this as if this is non-violent, or this situation. Well, clearly that's not the case if these people are trying to force their way through borders in order to get to their destination. In the past, whenever you had thousands of people that were amassing on your border, that was usually seen as an invasion. Now, the thing is that sort of grates on me about this sort of thing is, well, two things about that. The first one has to do with the fact that the people who make this crossing to try and get into the US, they kind of feel like they have a right to do so, that they have a right to just show up on the US border and then that the US will let them in. But this is not the case. There are things you have to go through. There are ways to go around this, and this is not the appropriate way to just show up with thousands of people on your border and demand entry to a country. This is also one of my problems that I have right now with what's going on in Canada with the Roxham Road. It's just the fact that we have thousands of people crossing our border and just to get and claiming asylum when they have no real reason to do so. In fact, recently we found out that what's going on in Roxham Road. About more than 60% of the people who have crossed into Canada were actually had legal status in the US when they made this trip up to Canada and to claim asylum. Now, there are times where there are real asylum seekers, but and this is also what they're trying to sort of present these people as, that they're fleeing due to persecution and violence and this. Yes, these are real situations in countries such as Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico, that you do have corrupt politicians, corrupt police. You have violence and gangs and cartels on the streets. So there is a real danger for them, but you can't just, because your country happens to have some gangs and some dangerous situations, that doesn't immediately qualify you for asylum. A lot of people like to try and conflate this with what was going on in the 1930s when people were fleeing Germany. But this is not the same situation, which also sort of begs the question that if the society that, since a lot of people on the left wing seem to think that our societies we live in are horrible, especially to people that are who are non-white, then why do so many people try and make this trip to be in a country such as America or Canada? The other thing is in a lot of the news reports, they like to bring up the fact that it's women and children and families. And yeah, absolutely, you will have these people that are you will have women and children, without a doubt, in situations like this. But in a significant amount of times, a lot of times the people there are a lot of single men that are coming through. And also, this is a way for gangs to get to make their way into a country, such as the MS-13 gang, which has made its way into the U.S. through caravans such as this. It's a very real possibility. But the media usually likes to neglect this part, and this is sort of the similar thing going back to Roxham Road that we see, is they're constantly showing pictures of families that are crossing the border, but they very rarely show you the pictures of single men or groups of men that are crossing the border, the people who are more likely to be a problem. They're not showing this. They don't like to show that part. They like to try and present that as it's just desperate families that need to get away. So this has been the big thing right now, and it looks like that the Mexican authorities have put the brakes on it, and hopefully it is so. But there was actually an interesting twist to this story, in the fact that video footage has come out that from what it appears that people are getting paid to join the caravan. Breaking video shows women and children in Honduras getting paid to join Caravan. And we have the video on here, but it says, Republican Representative Matt Gaetz shared footage Wednesday showing women and children being paid cash to join the migrant caravan that is hurtling towards the U.S. southern border. Gaetz suspected that George Soros' cash was being used based on very clear-cut evidence of George Soros' involvement in recent political matters, including the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation process. So we have the video footage right here.
Que se vaya. Solo las mujeres primero.
So we can see here that this man in the white shirt is handing out cash to everybody. This guy right here, he's kind of behind this woman, but he's handing out cash to everybody as they go. You can actually see him handing it to someone right here. And it wouldn't surprise me if this has something to do with George Soros, considering how he has the Open Societies Foundation, which I've talked about several times on the podcast. He has the Open Society Foundation, which is trying to tear down the idea of borders and also create mass migration. So when I was kind of bringing up this whole thing about the Global Compact for Migration, you can bet that he has a hand in that without a doubt. So it wouldn't surprise me. But anyway, let's finish this video first.
Solo las mujeres primero. Las mujeres que van recibiendo vayan saliendo. Vayan saliendo. Ahí está la Caminen por adelante, caminen por adelante. Ya saben.
Véngase para acá, no lo perdamos.
Ya la quiero que yo lo salga. Hasta ahí. Ya la mujer ya recibieron. Hasta ahí.
So it's unclear right now why the money is being handed out, whether these are supposed to be volunteers or like some humanitarian group that's handing out money in order for people to buy food for them during their trip, or whether they're being paid to actually join the caravan and head towards the border. But the fact that these people are getting paid, it wouldn't surprise me because this is also when I look at the similarities between what we're seeing here in Canada, is that we have our government, which is in the pocket of George Soros, and then we have a migrant crisis on our own border next to the U.S., which is one of the most prosperous countries in the world. But then we have a bunch of people that are heading towards our border, crossing in, and they don't look like doesn't really appear as if they're that terribly off. In fact, in some cases, they're probably better off than some people here in Canada. You can see video footage where these people have new shoes, new luggage, gold chains, new watches, the newest iPhone that's out there. And we're supposed to believe that these people are refugees fleeing persecution when they're not in any of the sort. So it's possible that in those situations, they are being paid off too. And I mean, especially when it comes to Canada, if you're going to if you're just going to accept everybody in and then give them a place to stay, access to medical care, and also you're going to give them checks for $50,000 every year just to stay in Canada, well, then of course people are going to head there. So right now it's unclear whether this has some connection to George Soros himself, but I wouldn't be surprised for what he's done. It's also because a lot of people have a lot of Democratic protesters have been paid in order to go out and protesting, and there's countless photos and videos out there of people who end up going into, whether it's a Trump rally or it's going in and protesting Republicans that are there giving speeches, and then afterwards you can see people with big yellow envelopes handing them stacks of cash. So we'll end up seeing what comes out of this, but I do think that this requires some sort of investigation into who these people are and why they're paying these migrants here in order to march towards America. The other interesting thing, just quickly, because they do make reference to the Caravan protesters, is that they were talking about people getting paid in order to do that. You can also find the video footage and the photos of people doing that. What was also interesting is that even the schools were involved with that, because there was a professor who was actually giving out extra credits to their students who would go and protest the Caravan confirmation. Or right before that when they were going through the whole process. So that's pretty interesting in and of itself. And we'll see if anything comes out of this, if the Caravan has been disbanded. But it looks like some people are still going to be trying at least to make the trek towards the United States. So the next story I want to quickly cover is this story. We're overdue. In 2020, Democrats expect a female frontrunner, or 3. A record number of women are running for Congress, mainly on the Democratic side, and polls show women favoring Democrats by a huge margin. So, first of all, when they say that Democrats expect a female frontrunner, my guess is apparently they've already forgotten 2016 election where Hillary Clinton was the front runner. And correct me, but she's a woman, I'm pretty sure. So they say we're overdue. Well, you've had a woman who's ran for president. Unfortunately, you picked someone that was so disliked and so unpopular that you ended up getting Trump. In a lot of ways, Democrats actually shot themselves in the foot, because it appeared as if Bernie Sanders would have actually been a much better person to compete against Donald Trump and possibly could have won the presidency over Hillary Clinton. But that wasn't the case. But as this article goes on to say, 3 prominent female Democrats all but openly began running for president this week, taking their most active steps yet to challenge President Donald Trump and claim leadership of a movement of moderate and liberal women that have come to define their party during the 2018 election. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York campaigned in the early primary state of New Hampshire on Thursday, while Senator Kamala Harris of California was poised to visit similar crucial South Carolina and Iowa. And Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts left little doubt about her intentions when she released a genetic test indicating she was Native American ancestry, a move to blunt Trump's taunt alleging she had mischaracterized her heritage. Well, she did mischaracterize her heritage because, and this graph just says it all. And this is really more of a meme, but it shows her political family tree and just how far back she has to go. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 generations, and look how many people this is. And so it's possible that she may have it. Besides, her percentage, her fraction was 1/64th to 1/1024th Native American. Not only is that a huge margin to go back on, between 64 and 1,024, sorry. That's not only is that a huge margin, but it's so small it's almost insignificant. But what is different about what Elizabeth Warren has done is she's presented herself and actually got into Ivy League schools and campaigned on the fact that she's Native American when she has such a small percentage. I mean, if you go this far back, you pretty much, I think, anybody could be considered any race whatsoever, because you'll probably have somebody in your family tree that has some relation to whoever it might be. You can probably go this far back and say you're black. Go this far back, say you're Chinese. Go for this far back and say you're Native American. And the thing is, too, about what she ended up doing was that a number of, because she's, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, she was Cherokee that she was saying. Now, a number of Cherokee groups were not happy when she came out with this result, because she's been fronting as a Cherokee for years now, campaigning on it and benefiting from it, and they pretty much wanted nothing to do with her. Since then, a lot of Elizabeth Warren supporters have actually attacked the Cherokee people, and sometimes, and not necessarily physically attacking them, but verbally attacking them, and sometimes even using racial slurs in order to, because they were not willing to back Elizabeth Warren. So apparently racism is okay as long as you're on the left wing of politics, and it's because you're defending the politician that you like. So it was just a joke, and they're trying to, many people in the media, and this is coming from the National Post, which is supposed to be Canada's conservative newspaper, although I personally think that's a joke, talking about how Trump's alleging she had mischaracterized her heritage. I'm a quarter Italian. I'm 3/4 Scottish and a quarter Italian. Well, really, I'm half Scottish, quarter Italian, and like a quarter of a bunch of different European in there. English, German, a couple others, I think. But even being a quarter Italian, I hesitate to even really call myself Italian. You know, it's not a big percentage. I have some characteristics that are Italian. But even at being 1/4, I still wouldn't go around calling myself an Italian because of it, because it just seems like it's too small of a percentage to make it worthwhile. If I say I'm Scottish, that's a little bit different. I have Scottish ancestry, and I'm at least half Scottish. So that makes sense. But Elizabeth Warren is going to go around calling herself Cherokee at 1/64th to 1,024th%. That's a huge fraction, and just absolutely ridiculous. But returning to this article. These women are beginning to offer themselves as potential presidents at a time when stark divides around gender are shaping the midterm campaign. A record number of women are running for Congress, mainly on the Democratic side, and polls show women favoring Democrats by a huge margin. Yet Trump has begun sharply assailing the Me Too movement and making increasingly explicit appeals to male identity. So far, we're just going to say that there's sort of, with the Democrats, to say there's this expectation of having a female run for president. That's not the way it works. This isn't a participation award where everybody gets this turn. This isn't softball where you allow everybody to go out to bat and take a hit regardless. It's not the way this works. You have to get in based on your merits, and you have to get in, unless you're Hillary Clinton where you rigged the election, you have to get in based on your popularity. So just this idea that we're overdue to be the front runners to have a female president. It doesn't work that way. And maybe they need to wake up, because the more and more they kind of campaign on this and try and campaign more based on gender, no wonder that the two political parties are so partisan when it comes to male and female. No wonder that so many men lean towards Republican and so many more women lead towards Democrats, because the Democratic Party has always appealed to the minority and to women, as it calls. And this is, in a way, how they've kept people sided with them, by telling them, both women and minorities, that you're disadvantaged. You need us. We will fight for you. You can't do anything because there's too much in your way by men. There's too many glass ceilings, as they would put it. But this isn't really the case these days. There's always going to be cases of bias. There's always going to be cases of bias where it's some things are unfair more to women and some things are more unfair to men. That's just life. That's the way it happens. For instance, a woman is much more to be perceived as a slut for some of her sexual escapades, and this doesn't even have to be much, you know. It doesn't. It just even sometimes if they're sleeping with one person, but they can be perceived as a slut because of it. Yes, it's unfair. It absolutely is. But that's just the way that life works. And there's other ways too where it's unfair towards men. Just because historically men have always been on the forefront and had more of the rights for such a long time that they still like to play up on this card, when really the idea of feminism has just sort of lost what it really was supposed to be about. Now it's just a blatant hatred. And the thing is too, and we can see too where it's also bias on the other side. For instance, if you have a place of work or a political party or whatever, and you have more men, well, now you have a problem because you need to hire more women. You can't have this many men. You got to hire more women. But yet at the same time, during the election, the Ontario provincial election, Andrea Horwath can stand up and say to the media proudly, "I've hired on 70% women for my campaign," and everybody applauds her as if she's some kind of hero for hiring on 70% women. But there's no calls for the gender partisan. Where's the diversity? There's none of that ends up going around like it would be if it was the other way around. If we take the two sides, and Doug Ford stood up and said, I've hired on 70% men for my campaign, there would be outrage because why do you not have more women on your campaign? But not for Andrea Horwath when she has 70% women. And we're just going to quickly go check out some polls, some Pew polls, which is showing the divide between men and women and which way they lean, whether they lean more Democratic or whether they lean more Republican. So we can see from the graphs over here on the right, share of women who identify with or lean towards Democratic Party has risen since 2015. Excuse me. So on the top, we have on the top left we have here, which is Republican, Democrats, and independents. So we've actually, it's kind of interesting. We see how how independents have been actually rising in the polls. So that's kind of interesting. But all in all, it really seems to be more Republicanism that actually sort of tends to win over when it comes to men over Democrat. And then we go down towards the women, and we can see that that's where things take a change. And at least when we're talking who lean Republican or lean Democrat, there is actually a pretty big difference between the two. I think that's a 19-point difference between the two. Yeah, it's a 19-point difference between the two right there. And when we're talking about who they actually support, whether it's Republican or Democrat, it's not quite as big of a margin, but we do see that there is a disparity there, that there are more Democratic women than there are Republican women. All right. So where was I? Now, here we go. But some Democrats are electing a woman is even more important now than in 2016. And many Democratic leaders believe that political mood in the party could quickly catapult one or more women to frontrunner status. Mayor London Breed said of San Francisco, the largest U.S. city with an elected female mayor, said Democrats have been rallying to female candidates in the midterms and there was an opportunity, now more than ever, for a woman to lead the party. Breed said she would back Harris if she runs. Quote, "We're overdue, let's put it that way," Breed said in an interview. "It would be great to finally see a woman step up and run this country," end quote. Cassandra Clark, 63, echoed that view last week outside a crowded campaign office near Atlanta. Clark, a retired civil servant, said it was essential for Democrats to nominate a woman in 2020, quote, because of how things ended up, end quote, after the last election. Just today, actually, I was listening on my way to school. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and it was the one where he had Roseanne Barr on. And Roseanne was talking about everything that happened since she put out the tweet and then lost her show. But what I thought was kind of funny is she ends up quoting the comedian Norm Macdonald on the situation. And what Norm Macdonald said on the situation was that in 2016, the Democrats fronted Hillary Clinton, a woman who was so disliked by Americans that they voted for someone they hated even more. And there's some truth to that, actually. There is I find a fair amount of truth to this claim that there were plenty of people that didn't really like Donald Trump. But they voted for him because they knew that Hillary Clinton was the definition of corruption when it came to a politician. The things she's done, she's so sneaky and backhanded and double dealing that she speaks one way and then she'll act another way, or she'll act one way and then speak another way. I mean, even just recently, she put out a tweet about the U.S. ambassador who was killed in Benghazi, and talking about how he's a patriot and did everything for his country, blah, blah, blah. And then a U.S. Soldier, actually, who was present in Benghazi when everything went down, retweeted her with his own caption on it, where he lost his shit on Hillary Clinton, just talked about how she left you left us to die. That's what you did, Hillary. It's you tucked tail and you ran away. You caused this shit. You tucked tail and ran away, and you left me, the ambassador, and everyone else who was present in Benghazi to die. And because of it, there were 4 Americans that were killed inside of Benghazi. And then she tried to cover it up. She tried to cover up by claiming it had to do with a film that was put out, and that's why everyone in the community ended up losing control and attacking the U.S. Embassy, when that wasn't the case. So this is why that ended up happening. And actually, I can't believe I closed it, actually. I'm going to see if I could quickly pull it up, because there was some other news article that I wanted to go along with this that pretty much just was icing on the cake for the way that the Democrats act. Because they're really not doing themselves any favor. They've been talking about how there's a blue wave that's coming in 2018, when it appears quite the opposite. Is that people are starting to leave the Democratic Party, and this includes voters from all walks of life, all minorities, women. They tend to be leaving the Democratic Party, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're going over to Republicans. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're becoming Republicans, but they're at least going independent. But because they're losing that support, that's less people who are willing to vote for the Democrats, and because they're becoming more and more unpopular, they can't really afford it right now. So it was this, I found what I was looking for. It was this article from Bloomberg, which says, the right finds perfect weapon against the left. Conservatives are using identity politics to destroy liberalism from within. And it's kind of funny because it goes on with the whole idea that the left can't meme because they can't. All the best memes come from the right wing of politics. And memes are actually... they are quite effective in this day and age, actually. I don't know exactly what it is, but memes are effective at sort of getting people over to your side. I think it's because you take something and turn it into a joke, and that's why. But anyway, imagine the perfect political and intellectual weapon. It would disable your adversary by preoccupying them with their own vanities and squabbles, a bit like a drug so good that users focus on the high and stop everything else they are doing. Such a weapon exists. It is called political correctness, but it is not a weapon against white men or conservatives, as it frequently alleges. Rather, it is a weapon against the American left. To put it simply, the American left has been hacked, and it is now running in a circle of its own choosing rather than focusing on electoral victories or policy effectiveness. Too many segments of the Democratic Party are self-righteously talking about identity politics, and they are letting other priorities slip. Of course, there's a lot of racism out there, which makes political correctness all the more tempting. Yet polling data suggests that up to 80% of Americans are opposed to politically correct thinking in its current manifestation. Latinos and Asian Americans are among the groups most opposed, and even 61% of self-proposed liberals do not like political correctness. The PC weapon reared its head again this weekend when Senator Elizabeth Warren was a big show of her genealogical test, showing she has some small part Native American. To someone immersed in the political correctness debate, this obsession with identity might seem entirely natural, but the actual reality is more brutal. The reality is that many Americans already think that the Democrats talk too much about identity. Warren would have done better to drop the topic altogether, as both right-wing and left-wing critics agree. Instead, she has kept the identity issue in the limelight and reminded Americans that elite, mostly Democratic-leaning institutions such as Harvard like to pat themselves on the back for their diversity in ways which seem phony to most of the rest of us. So, if you are a right-wing conservative or perhaps libertarian thinker and you consider yourself an opponent of political correctness, I have a message. Political correctness as a movement is a winning issue for you. It is disabling some of the ideas you don't like. You might want to celebrate in secret, but celebrate you should. Here's another ugly truth. The biggest day-to-day losers from the political correctness movement are often left of center people, most of all white moderate Democrats, especially those in universities. If you really believe that the PC stuff is irrational and out of control and making institutions dysfunctional, and that universities are full of left of center people, well, who is going to suffer most of the costs? It will be people in universities and in unjust and indiscriminate fashion. That means more liberals than conservatives, if only because the latter are relatively scarce on the ground. So it's pretty much talking about using political correctness as its own weapon against liberals, that they're pretty much, as they say it, it's eating itself from within. They're really eating themselves from within. So that's kind of, not going to lie, it's a little nice to see that it's that idea that you created this beast and this beast is turning against you. Alrighty. Hold on. So the next story I wanted to get into has to do with, as you all know, Justin Trudeau's immigration policy sucks, to say the least. It sucks. He has been massively importing people into our country, and we've been seeing this with the amount of numbers, that for a while it was 260,000, now 300,000 is the new regular, and some people are even toying with 450,000 or more. And as I stated earlier, it's that the Trudeau government wants the Canadian population to be 100 million by 2100. So less than 100 years, and we're going to increase our population by over 200%. So one of the things that really sucks about the Trudeau immigration policy is the fact that he's decided that he's going to bring ISIS fighters home. But at the same time, it's very difficult to have these people arrested, apparently, despite the fact that it's in our criminal code that anybody who goes to fight for another country is in violation of the code, and I can't remember how many years it says they deserve in prison. But for some reason right now, despite all their atrocities, this is something that's going on. The global news recently put out, I think it was a 3-part about Syrian ISIS fighters who are being held by Syrian forces and wanted to return to Canada. And some of the stories of these people are absolutely disgusting, such as one of the ISIS fighters was apparently using a severed human head in order to play soccer with, yet now he says he's learned his lesson and he wants to return to Canada. Most recently, it's Jihadi Jack, the British recruiter who's also been a fighter for ISIS, this guy has never set foot on Canadian soil. As far as we know, has never set a fucking foot on Canadian soil. But now he doesn't want to go back to Britain. He wants to come to Canada. That's where he wants to go. And so the Trudeau government is actually in talk with these people in order to bring them back. And their only policy has to do with de-radicalization. De-radicalization is a joke of a policy because it has more money based on research than action. It's never been tested before and most likely to fail. And there was an awful story a few months ago about one of the Yazidi sex slaves who came to Canada. She got her that was a real refugee, if you ask me. She came to Canada, was riding the bus one day. She looks over at the back, and who does she see riding the bus? One of her captors, one of the men who she was sold to and raped her. He was riding the bus. Like, how disgusting is that in our own country? This is why it sucks. But what's nice to see is that at least the Ford government is going to do something about it. If the Trudeau government isn't going to do anything, Doug Ford is going to do something about it. Now, I don't always agree with everything that Doug Ford did. I put out my video about his use of the notwithstanding clause, and it mostly was just that I don't like the notwithstanding clause. Recently, he announced that he's dissolving the round table for, it's like the round table for sexual assault or something like that. I'm not in favor of that because I think that could be an effective tool if used. But you're not going to agree with all decisions made by a politician. But this is one that I really like. And this is one of the reasons why people end up voting for Ford. Now, it wasn't for anything like this specifically. Nobody voted for Ford because he says, I'm going to get tough on ISIS terrorists. But it's sort of along the lines of why people voted for someone like Doug Ford, because they wanted to change. They wanted to get away from what has been the status quo of politics all the time. And here was a guy that was going to come in and do everything a little bit differently, because even if Patrick Brown was still in the running, he just wasn't that different than a lot of the liberals, which is also one of the complaints put out against Andrew Scheer. It's that him and Patrick Brown actually have a lot in common, that they're not very different from their counterparts. But anyway, Ontario bill aims to strip returning terrorists of provincial privileges. And Doug Ford actually not too long ago put out an announcement about this on Twitter, where he says, if you leave Canada to go fight for ISIS, you should not be welcomed back with open arms. Since Justin Trudeau does not seem to take this seriously, MPP Dave Smith is taking action to send a message that there are consequences for leaving Ontario to commit indefensible crimes. Now, the only thing about this is the fact that it only takes effect in Ontario, so it really we can't do anything about ISIS fighters that go to Quebec or Manitoba or Saskatchewan or anything like that. But at least in Ontario, where I do believe that most of these ISIS fighters are going to be resettling, at least here they are taking action to it. So, with a quarter of the nearly 200 Canadian members of overseas terrorist groups returning home and at least a dozen more held in Syrian detention camps, an impending private members' bill will ensure that they're not entitled to benefits enjoyed by law-abiding Ontarios, the Sun has learned. Set to be tabled at Queen's Park next week, the Terrorist Activities Sanctions Act targets those who have carried out terrorist acts abroad and exclude them from such privileges as holding an Ontario driver's license or accessing provincial health coverages. Ooh, that is a kick to the balls. You can't drive and you don't have access to medical coverage. That's lovely. Quote, it's my strong belief that somebody who's committed a criminal act as a terrorist outside of Canada, when they come back to Ontario, they should not have more privileges than somebody who lives in Ontario, said Peterborough Kawartha MPP Dave Smith, the bill's sponsor. Since the federal government doesn't seem to take this seriously, I felt obligated to take action and send a message that there are consequences for leaving Ontario to commit indefensible crimes. These crimes are referenced in Section 83 of the Criminal Code and include such acts of hijacking, jeopardizing the safety of civil aviation, hostage-taking, and financing terrorist acts, as well as violations of international treaties, including maritime navigation and lawful importation of nuclear material. Under the bills, offenders would find themselves stripped of their Ontario driver's license and hunting and fishing license. Hunting and fishing license, as well as access to OHIP grants and loans for post-secondary education, disability income and housing support, rent geared to income under the Housing Service Act, and WSIB coverages. So they're pretty much stripping you from all the major government assistance that you can receive. That's pretty fucking epic. Well done, Doug Ford. Well done. It's good to see that somebody has a pair of balls willing to take action, because Justin Trudeau really does not have that. Oh, there's more actually. Dependent children would also be considered in need of protection as defined by the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act. I don't see this almost seems like a common sense thing to me, because if your father is a terrorist, then the child would be in need of protection. And actually a perfect example of this would be Omar Khadr. If you remember, Omar Khadr, before he ended up getting captured, he was actually taken to Afghanistan by his father, and he met all sorts of people of Al-Qaeda, such as Osama bin Laden. And I believe Osama bin Laden right-hand man. So since he was a child, in deep with these terrorist organizations and some of the most wanted people in all of the world. And I'm pretty sure this also happened after the 9/11 attacks. So this would be when everybody wanted Osama bin Laden. So that's saying quite a lot if you ask me. But even at the beginning, like they say, a quarter of the ISIS fighters are coming back. A quarter of them are coming back. That's just an awful number. That's a scary number, because the people have done unspeakable things. And instead of being punished, it almost feels like they're being rewarded. And it makes us look weak. It makes us look like a joke. And we see what ends up happening is that more terrorists want to come to Canada. And because of this, there's actually people are trying to warn Americans about this, because now there's a danger to America, because of how we have indiscriminate importation of immigrants, and also because we're welcoming back ISIS terrorists who have actually been trained to fight. Because of this, Americans are starting to take notice, and they're actually starting to pay more attention to Canada, because they're worried that the next terrorist attacks aren't going to come from somebody overseas that flies to America, but are going to come from people who are stationed in Canada and make their way down to the U.S. So that's saying a lot. And the last story I want to talk about. Federal Liberals stumble into a $200 billion windfall, and they spent it all. Running deficits twice the size as promised, with no plan to return to balance and no sign that spending is being reined in, is a recipe for future disaster. And let's not forget that it is the Liberals right now that are talking about climate change and talking about how we need to do something about it for the future, for future generations. That's who we need to do it for. But apparently their spending doesn't have anything to do with that. The Economist this week warned policymakers to, quote, start preparing for the next recession while they still can. The release of the Government of Canada's annual finance report for the 2017-2018 fiscal year, however, suggests that the Trudeau Liberals have no notion of foregoing that most enjoyable of all entitlements, spending other people's money. The annual budget is an aspirational document revealing what the government would like to do, but the annual report is a look in the rearview mirror at what it did in the year ending March 31st, 2018. This year is complicated by a restatement of the public finances going back years to factors in an accounting change. The Auditor General ordered the restatement related to discounts and unfunded pension obligation, and it adds to an additional $200 billion to the federal debt, which now stands at $671 billion. Which I actually don't think that's correct, because I feel like not too long ago I heard that it was actually $1 trillion now. No, I'm going to have to look into that, because I don't believe that number is actually correct. But anyway, but the story is relatively simple. 2017-2018 was a bumper year for the government revenues, which rose by $20 billion or 6.9% from the previous year. Personal income taxes increase accounted for half of that flood of new money coming into the coffers, around half of which was related to economic growth and the other half to the unwinding of tax planning that has suppressed revenues in 2016-2017. So pretty much we've seen the Liberal government as they made promises of a $9.5 billion. It was either $9 or $9.5 billion per year for the first 3 years, and on the fourth year they will balance the budget. That was their promise, and the whole idea was a stimulus package. Now, the stimulus package has worked in the past. This is what what Prime Minister Harper did. Back in the 2008, I think back in 2009 actually is when he started doing it. After the financial crash, he did a stimulus package to try and reinvigorate the economy, and it actually worked. It did actually work, and it brought us out of debt, and it actually avoided some of the worst catastrophes that we saw in America when it came to the housing crisis. So it has worked in the past, but the problem is that the Trudeau government doesn't know how to invest its money. Their idea of a stimulus package sucks. I mean, if we take a look back again at the 2018 budget, I think it was. Yeah, I guess it was. It was their 2018 budget where they ended up showing that they were investing so much money into gender. I believe there's over 300 mentions in that budget of gender, when there was very, very little when it came to actually what they're going to do with this money. We're going to throw money here, we're going to throw money there, is what they said. But considering how they also campaigned on infrastructure, that they were going to do something different and try and create new infrastructure for us, they allocated less than 1% of the budget over the next couple of years towards infrastructure, and everything was about budget. No wonder that right now our GDP sucks. No wonder our economy is faltering, and no wonder businesses and investments are leaving Canada for America. Trudeau has tried to say many times that Canada is open for business, but this isn't the case whatsoever. If you're going to try and tax people higher and you're going to put all these barriers in place, then it doesn't work. And we saw that during negotiation of NAFTA, because Trudeau wanted to stay true to his gender. He had gender that he wanted on the table, and he had Indigenous rights that he wanted on the table. All this he wanted on the table, and it took us more than a year of negotiating with the Americans, and because of it, we got off with a shitty fucking version of that. Especially Article, I think it was Article 32.10, if I'm remembering correctly, of the USMCA agreement, stated that, and is now granted this applies to all the nations, but when it came to that, they're talking about how every single party has to inform the others if they're going to open negotiations with somebody that isn't part of the agreement. And because of that, at the same time, that means that any other parties have 6 months to have to give a 6-month notice that they're pulling out of the agreement, which it won't really affect America because Canada nor Mexico can pull out of this. But if Canada, let's say, wanted to negotiate a free trade agreement with China, let's say, then the Americans could pretty much veto it, because they say, no, we don't want you to do this. If you go ahead and do it, then you're going to, then we're going to pull out of the USMCA. Well, then you're kind of screwed when America is your biggest trading partner, and I'm pretty sure that's the same for Mexico, that America is their biggest trading partner. So that was a shitty deal. We didn't get the tariffs taken off our steel and aluminum industry. Thankfully, we managed to avoid the tariffs on the auto industry. But our whole deal sucked. Nothing short of sucked. And they have no one to blame. They have no one to blame but our shitty negotiators because of it. And let's not to mention that how much money the government has been sending out across the country, different areas. Libs outspent Tories in first 100 days. This is from February 13th, 2016. In his first 100 days in office, the majority government of Stephen Harper handed out about $4 billion worth of grants, loans, and other spending commitment. Justin Trudeau's Liberals, though, topped that in their first 100 days in office by more than $1 billion. From its swearing in on May 18, 2011 to August 26, 2011, the Harper government distributed 443 checks worth a combination of $3.9 billion. From its swearing in from November 4, 2015 to February 12, 2016, the Trudeau government distributed 208 checks worth a combination of $5.3 billion. The biggest checks the Trudeau government cut or promised to cut were for big-ticket overseas aid commitment. Last week, for example, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised $1.3 billion in new humanitarian aid as part of Canada's new contribution to fighting ISIL. In fact, of the $5.3 billion in spending commitment announced by the Trudeau government in the first 100 days, just $997 million was for projects inside the country. The rest, $4.3 billion, will be spent outside Canada on everything from aid to for refugees to helping poor countries fight climate change. So he gave a bunch of your money and mine out to a bunch of different countries, and he's going to do it all over again. I actually think this is saved on my phone. So let me take a quick look at it. But I think I have it here of the amount of money that he's given away. Here we go. Let's see if you can see that. I'll make the screen big. There we go. So that's all the money that he's given away, and this is very recently. But as we look at it, it says Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, $351 million. Pakistan, $2 billion. Libya, $1.45 billion. Egypt, $397 million. Jordan, $463 million. Sudan, $870 million. Congo, $359 million. Kazakhstan, $304 million. And Iraq, $1.08 billion. That's all your money, taxpayers' money, that is getting shipped out of our country and going to people who don't deserve it and give absolutely nothing back. But that doesn't stop Trudeau. And this is not the first time that he sent large amounts of money like this overseas. I mean, hell, this was recently, what I just read from the Toronto Sun. That was something that was from a couple years ago. But he's done it time and time and time again. So if you ever wonder why the you're not receiving anything back from the Trudeau government, it's because he's too committed to the idea of globalism to actually try and fund here at home. And something that Stephen Harper actually said recently, it may actually be from his new book. I could be wrong on that. But at least a statement that he made recently, either in his book or to the media, or both, is he said that these days it's not about left and right anymore. It's about globalism versus patriotism, versus nationalism. Globalism versus nationalism. That's what really the new fight in our era is. And anybody who says that it hasn't changed, that nothing has changed in politics, is wrong. Because it's not just left versus right anymore. Now it's whether you want to be part of this idea of a one world government, or do you want to be in control of your country? It's time for people to make that decision and choose your side wisely. Thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will hopefully be back soon with more content for you, because I know I've been slacking a little bit over the last month or so. Just trying to get it's been the last few weeks, just been tests at school and stuff, so it's been a lot of studying for that. But anyway, I hope to be back on track soon and back doing this more. Thank you again, everyone. Talk to you soon.